Rajul, lovely
Hi.
to meet you. What a cool little setup you've got there. Where
Thank
are
you.
you?
It's my studio. I used to work in the corner of our bedroom, which was just impossible. I'll give you a quick tour.
Oh, yes, please.
I don't hanging plants.
Oh
Here we
my
go.
gosh.
Around all my goodies.
Beautiful. So, Rajul, you are also known as the small gardener.
Yes, I'm
So
small and I love gardening.
me
That's where it came
too.
from.
Oh, you got there before
Yeah.
me. So, tell us, whereabouts are you based?
So I live in Norwich, and most of my work is around Norfolk and Suffolk.
And what have you been working on recently with regards to, being in lockdown? Have you been gardening more, gardening less?
Mine often gets neglected when I spend time in other people's gardens, and it sort of fell in around the same time that I was pulling back from. I used to do a bit of garden maintenance locally for people, but I found the design business was growing a lot more, and it was taking time away from those jobs, which I love. So I've sort of passed a lot of those jobs on now. But lockdown has sort of affected the business a little bit. But I was still, because you're working outside, I was still sort of meeting people and their potential clients in their gardens and having a look around. And then I can work from the studio on design work, and planting's all outdoors, so it wasn't too bad really.
You started off doing maintenance, but did you did an official sort of more formal training to become a gardener, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it basically all started. I had a bit of a career or a bit of a life glitch. Is that the word? So I was a teacher, primary school teacher for years, and then had 2 children. And when my second was a baby, I basically developed what was later diagnosed as postnatal depression. And then that all coincided with us moving from London to Norwich. And starting a new really stressful job, and kind of 2 children under 3 at home, and it all kind of fell apart, and I basically had a complete, I don't know what the word is, breakdown kind of. My depression was really bad, and I stopped work, and found that gardening just personally for me was really, I'm sure you've heard this from lots of people, it just did me so much good, and I became quite obsessed and kind of reading magazines and gardening books and watching everything I could on TV and that kind of thing. And I suddenly thought, well, I love this so much, I wonder if I can turn this into something I do full time. Well, not full time at the time, but something I can do for a living. And I literally just thought, oh, I'll give it a go. And it sort of all happened around the same time where I thought, oh, I'm going to start blogging, because it just felt like a really natural outlet for me to sort of express all the feelings that I had.
Yeah.
Some of it's really personal, some of it's sort of just helpful, because I felt like if I'd had something like the blogs that I do when I was starting up gardening, it would have really helped me out, and just sort of trying to keep things really straightforward and chatty really. So and at the same time I kind of just put a few notices here and there, saying, offering garden maintenance, and that's where we came up, and the blog and all of that came about really organically at the same time, and that's when I came up with the Small Gardener name, and it all just sort of happened. And as a result of that, I'm trying to think what I did first. I did a short course, which was a garden design course. It was only about 8 weeks, I think, 1 day a week, just to see if I didn't want to invest heavily in something that might not work. And so I did this sort of 8-week course and just found it really enjoyable, gave me lots more confidence. And then I think I ended up doing a diploma basically in the end, a garden design diploma, and then I did an RHS level 3 course, but all the while kind of just working and building the business up at the same time, and it just sort of word of mouth, and we've got a lovely local community here and everyone sort of knows each other, and it's all just grown from there really.
That's amazing, and it's so wonderful that you sort of started out and as a sort of garden maintenance person, and then started thinking a bit more ambitiously alongside of doing those small jobs, and it sounds like a really sort of inspiring but also potentially sort of achievable sort of pathway into becoming a gardener. Now, being called the Small Gardener and talking about your love of stories, I was really enjoying looking at your blog, and I really loved seeing all your pictures of when you were a little girl.
Yeah,
and
they're always good
a
for
very
laugh.
different kind of garden to what you have now. Tell me a little bit about your sort of earliest memories and what you were like as a young potential gardener? Were you into gardening when you were a little kid?
I wasn't really into gardening as such, but I was definitely into gardens and being in gardens. I mean, I grew up in Kenya and in Nairobi, and it's very much kind of outdoor childhood, basically. Sort of, if you weren't barefoot, you were in flip-flops. And I've got loads of memories. We had a very big garden, our first house that I remember, so the top half of the garden was just this really steep kind of bit of woodland, and then there was a nice lawn and sort of more sort of garden section near the front around the veranda. And so I remember we had passion fruits growing all around the veranda, and my mum used to make passion fruit juice every year from them. We had this huge pepper tree that's a bit like a willow tree with all the branches coming down around it, and we used to hide in there and play in there. And then round the side where we had like a climbing frame and stuff, it used to get really muddy because there was a tap round there.
Oh, muddy, lovely.
Yeah, in Nairobi you had this lovely, really fine red silty soil, so you can make the best kind of squidgy mud, and so we just got like hats, knickers and t-shirts, and or even just knickers, getting mucky and having fun and running around really. I remember taking my cars out on safari on the lawn as well, because obviously we used to go on safari sometimes.
Oh, that sounds charming. That sounds so lovely. And sometimes I do workshops with quite young children, and the thing that they enjoy the most is just like getting sort of completely submerged in mud. And although I guess parents potentially feel like there might be dangers in the garden, I think with a lot of gardeners that I speak to, like yourself, it seems like that early memory of being outside actually really offers a sort of security, and being out there, potentially you could fall out of a tree or trip over or slip in mud or whatever. It sounds like a real sort of joyful place of security.
I think so. I totally agree with that.
And I suppose, do you feel quite comfortable to let your children just roam around and poke around in the garden as well?
Yeah, so my two are now 9 and 11, so it's a while since they were really, really little. So I was an early years teacher originally, so I totally agree with you. There are dangers in gardens that we should be aware of, but I do think if you're in the garden when your children are little with them, and you're talking about the garden and helping them explore it, they soon learn, and it just becomes natural for them to not only be safe out there and learn how to have fun out there, but also to be responsible for it.
Yeah.
So my kids, I mean, I don't mind if you're somewhere in a meadow or something and kids are picking flowers and stuff, but my kids know that they can pick flowers up off the ground or whatever and play around, and petals that have fallen. We've always had foxgloves in the garden, for example, even since they were real little toddlers. But I've never been concerned that they would do anything inappropriate with them, because it just, as they became more independent from me and I wasn't watching them all the time, they knew which parts of the garden they could pick things from and eat things from and not. And then they also knew to ask me if they weren't sure. So, there are certain things I probably wouldn't keep in my garden, like aconites, that are really deadly, but they know where the red currant bush is. They can go and help themselves to things,
More likely to get a little prickly thorn in your finger from something like that.
It happens, doesn't it? Whack a bit of Savlon on it and a plaster, you'll be fine the next morning.
It's a really common understanding, people that like gardening and being in gardens, that it sort of, I think it makes you a bit more resilient as an adult. And one thing a lot of people talk about again and again, and there's so many multiple benefits to gardening. For you, and the turning point for you, did you feel that being in a garden and gardening sort of was an immediate help? Like, did you feel like, being in a garden immediately
I still do. I still suffer from anxiety and low mood quite regularly, especially at times of the year when I'm not in the garden, in winter and when the light's gone. For me, it's the act of, I think it's because it's so multisensory and so involving. It's that moment where you say, oh, I'll just weed that bed. So you start weeding that bed, and then you see something, oh, I'm going to prune that needs pruning. And then suddenly you're doing something else, and the jobs just slowly build up. And I think there's the physical aspect. I did a blog post about digging, and how digging, just getting a sweat up and just being really involved, and the smells and the textures and everything. I think it's so involving that you sort of are able to process whatever it is that's going on in your head. And when you come out of it, even if you haven't exactly resolved anything, your mood is lifted, and you're then, but you just feel a bit better able to cope. And plus then you've got the satisfaction the results of all your labours, which kind of you can then feel good about and think, well, like, you know, that's something I've achieved. So I don't think it's a cure-all, but I do think it's a really good therapy. And I know for some people it might be running or knitting or something, you know, which I'm not a runner, but I do love a bit of crochet in the winter months. But I think it's all similar. It's sort of a physical activity that you have to focus on, that somehow helps your mind settle.
It's so true, yeah. And I mean, even there have been cases reported that they've been prescribing gardening. You know, GPs are actually, you know, gardening, and you know, I've always thought, well, if there were more places for people to access gardens, then that could be something that was widely rolled out. So what I was going to say is, where you are now, I mean, it's not totally close, but for me, down in South London, it's the sort of opposite end of the country for me. But do you have a local transitions town near you?
Know.
Okay, so it's quite a few miles over, but there's a place, well, Northants have got a group called Transitions Towns. Quite a few places in the country now, well, across the UK rather, have got transition towns, where little groups, creativity groups, outdoor groups, are kind of trying to highlight the projects that they're doing to you know, make their communities better, sort of prettier, bring people together. And as potentially your sort of garden, your landscape type of ground is very different to what I've got down in flinty South London, do you have any tips for what you would recommend people that are just starting out to try in your sort of neck of the woods?
So in Norfolk, we've got a mix really in terms of the type of conditions we've got. It is, well, one thing that's true all over East Anglia is we're incredibly dry. Really low rainfall, and I'm saying this right at the end of a heat wave where we were promised thunderstorms, and we had a ton of thunder this morning, ton of thunder, some lightning, and then just a dribble, and now it's boiling hot again and sunny. So my key things would be, look at what's growing nearby in gardens near you, and this is just, everyone says this, but look at what's doing well, and just try things. We've got clay soil in some parts of Norfolk, but around where I am, it's very sandy, very free draining, and there's only so much you can do to it. I mean, you can add tons of organic matter, yes, but ultimately it's still going to be dry. So there are things I would love to grow, but it's just not going to happen. So what I've done is slowly over the years is work out what's really happy in my garden and what isn't, and have lots of them. Not to say you can't have a beautiful garden, but things like grasses and prairie plants do fabulously up here and look really good. Hydrangeas, you might struggle a little bit. I've lost roses this year because of the droughts that we've had. You know, we've had 3 years of drought in a row.
It's really difficult to try and anticipate now what is the best thing to grow, because the weather is so changing, and with climate change it seems like it's getting hotter and hotter year on year, and for longer as well. We're getting these really, what is it called, like tropical weeks now. I mean,
I can believe it. It's felt like that here. I mean, the one thing I would say is there are huge plus sides to having dry sandy soil, which is you don't have to lift your dahlias and your gladioli. You know, you can leave them in and pretty much they'll come through next year.
I didn't know that.
The things don't really rot off in the ground in the same way they would in a wet winter soil. We don't really have wet winter soil, you know. It's so, you know, I never bothered lifting things, and you might lose one or two, but quite often they do really well.
Oh, it's a great tip. I didn't know that, and I have lost quite a lot of bulbs over the years from not doing it, because sometimes I think, oh, it's okay, I'll just change it over next year. I'm probably not going to do the same thing, and it also works out, you know, quite expensive to buy bulbs, and there's that time.
It can be, yeah.
That's brilliant. Okay, well, I will definitely let the Transition Towns Northants know about that little tip. Another great tip that I saw on your blog was actually not necessarily about gardens, but it was about driveways. And with the project Lend and Tend, quite a lot of people, particularly in London, you can't access the back garden without going through the house. So more people,
there's a lot of terraces up here like that as well, actually.
Okay, right. Yeah, so because you can't get through to the garden, it can be problematic what with shielding and COVID situation. So what people are now suggesting is, you know, hey, I've got a front drive or bit of garden that you can stick a planter in, that you can grow things in, maybe tomato plants at this time of the year. But what was really interesting about your article was about actually rewilding that drive so you could have a dual purpose space. Would you mind talking over that a little bit, that blog?
Definitely, because I mean, this is something we're doing. So I'm having my front garden redone. I'm lucky, I've got a very big front garden. So I've got half of it is kind of a mini allotment, and then we've got a driveway. But we're redoing it because it's sort of, we want to make it more manageable, and I've got plans. But anyway, there's just little things you can do. So the space you want to put your car on doesn't have to be completely solid. You know, we're going to leave what my landscaper friend Neil called a landing strip, which in my head means something else. But
yes, me too, me too.
So, you know, so you've got a nice solid track for the two wheels, for the wheels of the car, but in the middle, leave it open to the soil, stick some shingle over it and plant it, because especially if you commute, your driveway is going to be empty for a huge amount of the day. Fill it with low growing plants, you know, things that are going to creep and crawl all over the place, that are great for attracting insects and butterflies and bees. Don't waste that space. And even the little edges and crevices between your fence and your driveway, you know, don't forget that little space too. You know, you can have house leeks all down there. There's lots of things that you can plant there that can be beneficial. And then if you are on a road, say, that isn't very busy or doesn't have a lot of pollution, and your front garden is the sunny part of your garden, maybe you've got a shady back garden, grow some fruit and veg out there. Okay, you may have a few passers-by nicking the odd strawberry or whatever, but that doesn't really matter, does it? And the lovely thing about being in a front garden is you get to know your neighbourhood. So, you know, if you're out there, you're doing a bit of pruning, a bit of, you know, what I call pottering, people stop and chat to you, and you get to know your neighbours, and you see people regularly, and that's really lovely.
I think in just modern day life, there's such a sort of case of going home, slamming the door, you know, and you don't go out again, you get in your car or you get run for the bus or whatever, and we don't really communicate with people like they did in the sort of olden days. And as my dad sort of says, you know, we used to know each other and our neighbours. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to be in each other's pockets, and we don't really need to, you know, be best friends with everyone on our street, but it's just so nice to sort of feel like there's a community around you, and people that you can just sort of say hello to, because I think there's this real kind of case, again, particularly in London, people don't talk to each other. There's this kind of blinkered, you know, you're a weirdo if you talk to people.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I'm a few of my clients recently, when I've been doing front gardens, have been saying, oh, we're thinking of putting a bench outside. And I think that is as a result of lockdown, and just the whole clap for carers thing must have been a big part of it, because everyone was outside at the same time, you know. And I think I love the idea of it. Say your front garden catches the evening sun, you just have a bench out there, one of you with a glass of wine, the other one kind of pruning the geraniums a bit, I don't know. It sounds rather idyllic to me. And then, you know, someone might walk past that, you know. But you're right about the difference between London and elsewhere. I was one of those weird people who talked to people and chatted, but then as soon as you move out of London, you're like, wow, I'm not weird anymore. Everyone talks to you.
And something that you were saying as well earlier about, you know, really focusing on your senses and kind of getting lost in the work. I mean, I would say this to anyone that's thinking about, you know, trying gardening and has potentially had a bit of a challenging time recently. It's those kind of five senses, and being in the smells of, you know, damp mud, and, you know, and hearing slight buzzing sounds, and those kind of lovely sort of breezy, sort of grassy sounds, and it really kind of makes you be present without you even trying, and without you even sort of forcing it.
When you start talking gardening, one thing I find is that gardeners just are always looking for someone to talk to about gardening. So that was a brilliant thing about doing these courses, is I've just got this little gang of plant geeks now that we're just, you know, it's not boring if you talk to them in detail about something. Someone else will feel like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but we're all really into it. You know, or you want to tell you about some plans you've got for something, or you know, they're telling you about this new area of garden they're transforming or whatever, or you know, when you go on garden visits with your family, it's like, oh, it's a nice walk around, this is all very pretty, let's go get an ice cream. Whereas if you're going around with gardeners, you're like, oh my God, I've never seen that variety of salvia before, I wonder if that would work here, there, or other. How do you know, like, do you normally prune that? And it's totally different.
Yes, it is.
I do think gardeners are desperate to talk to fellow plant lovers.
I was chatting to a gardener called Adderley Richmond, and I was writing up the article, and we were talking about the auricular theatre, and I was trying to find an example of the auricular theatre, and then I saw your blog, and then I cross-posted to your blog on that,
because I thought it would be a little niche thing. And then I had someone from Gardeners World, the TV show, contacted me a few months ago to ask if they could use my photo of the Sissinghurst Auricular Theatre when they did their programme section about auricular theatre. And I was like, what? How have you even found me? I know, weird.
That's amazing. Oh, congratulations. Yeah. It was a great photo. It's a really good example. And the amazing thing is, talking about the auricular theatres and talking with Adderley, there were so many parallels with garden sharing and people who didn't have a garden, how they got around it, and the sort of history of house plants and why we are so obsessed with houseplants, because many people didn't have gardens. And it's just so spooky that there are so many little like parallels and crossovers, and all this synchronicity is happening. And now I'm sort of really kind of keen on learning more about the history and really where we're going with gardening. Penelope Hobhouse. Okay.
The story of gardening, it is brilliant.
Oh, wowie. Oh, that's amazing. I'll check that out, because my bookshelves are full of like how to practical gardening advice, and something I'm really interested in now is soil health and no-dig gardening, and trying to sort of rewild as well, which is why I loved the article about the changing the driveways, you know, if not for you and your benefit, for the benefit of all the little insects and all of the creatures.
And I think the other thing is to not care too much what other people think of your garden. I think that's really, really important. And I know one of the things with houseplants that started to drive me a bit crazy was the whole Instagram houseplant thing. Like, everything has to look perfect, and it has to be, the picture has to be dressed and framed and all you curated and all this. Actually, they're there to give you joy. And yeah, definitely to benefit the environment and wildlife and things, if you're talking about your garden. But, you know, any garden is special if it's special to you. I don't think it has to be Instagram worthy, you know, even if you're starting out. I think because the idea of people say, oh, well, I'm, you know, I don't really know what I'm doing. It doesn't matter. No. Who's going to know? Who's going to judge you? No one. You know, just have a go. And
you know, well experienced gardeners have failures. You know, I've talked to gardeners that have been doing it for 30 years and things still die.
It's so good for your resilience, honestly. And what's really helped me is I always know that, okay, this shrub looks dreadful this year, it didn't flower, I clearly should have done something different to it, blah blah blah, but next year you've got a fresh new start. Because you know, so nothing is ever lost. Oh, this border's starting to look shabby and tired, well, I can just redo it. It doesn't matter, and it's all part of the fun. You know, it's not like you do a garden and it's finished. It's an ever-changing, ever-evolving thing, and you'll get things right or you won't. And you think, well, actually, I thought that was going to work there, but it doesn't. I'm going to try it somewhere else. And it really builds your resilience, and it just, all that experimentation is really important. And to not feel like, well, I planned it, it's got to work, and if it doesn't work, I failed.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right. And I think about what you say about the sort of Instagram culture. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I mean, this is
I am too, honestly. I love it.
I collect cacti as well, and I've got a cacti which is fluffy and it looks like a cat's tail, and it flowers for about a day, and then the flower drops off, and it takes months for a new.
And you're good enough to get it to flower, are you?
Oh wow! Well, that I think it just does.
I've never had a cactus flower ever, but I'm not.
Oh well, I got these from a really great place up near Lincoln. This amazing cactus nursery that I just stumbled across. I mean, obviously, cause lockdown, I could stand there for about half an hour looking at my plant and just gazing at it. But then I was going to take a photo, and then the light had changed, and I thought, oh, sod it, I don't care about sharing this photo. I've just enjoyed being with my plants for half an hour and sort of tending to them. And yeah, and it's for me, I mean, I haven't been so stressed with work recently, but you know, it really is a massive stress reliever to, you know, do some watering and sort of the tactility, is that word, of plants. I mean, maybe not so much cacti, but
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
tactility of you know, just being around them, and yeah, it's so I can't say enough how beneficial it is. And so, well, we all agree, which is the
Yeah.
great thing.
I think it's brilliant, and I think one thing, because I had a look at the website, and I think there aren't any, well, maybe there's one or two, but there aren't very many up in my neck of the woods. But I love the idea of it. I know they're a luxury, because I know loads of people don't have that outside space, and even if it's a tiny space, at least it's something, you know.
Yeah.
So allotments and sharing gardens and community gardens, I just think they're so important.
They are so important, and I think even big corporations now are sort of looking to, you know, convert their roof spaces into working gardens for employees, because it's just sort of communing with nature and just being alone with your thoughts for a while, and that sort of act of being present while being around plants is so beneficial. And I think finally the most of the world is actually catching on. I thank you so much for
That's all
chatting
right,
to
my son.
me. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.